Thank you. Please help me to welcome George from Nobleton, Ontario, Canada, and take us home, George.
Thank you very much. My name's George, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, George.
I can't see your name. Kathy, right? Kath?
Kath, yeah.
Kath. Thank you, Kath. That was very nice.
Awesome.
What a great day. Fantastic. I started this day off going to an AA funeral of an old timer, sober 52 years. Huh? And it was at this, it's called the Mississauga Golf and Country Club. That's where they had the funeral. It was beautiful. And, you know, the family, how grateful they never mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous. They mentioned the fellowship. They never mentioned AA. There's a lot of people there. But how grateful they were to Alcoholics, and they are to Alcoholics Anonymous. Because their father gave them so much in the last 52 years. Phenomenal gift, this AA, with the spiritual awakening that we receive as a result of the previous 11 steps. Oh, you know, I used to drink, I used to drink, and I used to end up in jail, not just because of drinking, other things too. Then eventually I ended up in prison. By the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 30 years old. I was in this treatment, not this recovery home, and I was acting funny there. And so the director took me to the nearest hospital for an appointment with a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And he asked me some questions. And he diagnosed me, and he said to the director that I had the beginnings of wet brain. That's the Korsakoff syndrome. That means you're not around. So I'm definitely a miraculous transformation, as one of my late sponsors used to call me, as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been here more than half my life. And this awakening that I've received has transformed me in many, many ways. You know, our book says in the spiritual appendix, and this is important stuff, because if you're new here, or you're setting a goal, or you're waiting for something to happen, or what's going to happen here, this is what it says. It says the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that a personality change sufficient bring about recovery from alcoholism. Now, in the doctor's opinion, it tells us why we drink there. And I'm not talking about the first step now, because everybody did a great job on the steps here. But it tells us exactly why. You're going to hear at meetings sometimes, oh, I drank, that's all that matters. You drank, and it doesn't matter why you're an alcoholic, and all this type of sometimes it doesn't disturb me, but sometimes makes senseless talk. The doctor tells us exactly why we drank. It says men and women drink. Why? Essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. That means no capiche. To them, their alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can experience the sense of ease and comfort. How? at once, which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through a well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of their recovery. Now, what does that mean? What is that? You know, the doctor's very nice, because if it was me and I was the doctor, I would have put in the next line, that means they're going to die. You see, that's a lot of times this is the part that the alcoholic doesn't like to hear. You see, I never like to hear that when people used to say to me, you know, kid, you're going to die. Look at you. When I came to AA, I thought I was Bon Jovi. I didn't know I wasn't Bon Jovi, okay? I had the long hair, the dusters, the earrings, the wanted dead or alive, the holes in the jeans, and the bandanas all over the place. I looked like a clown. But you loved me anyway. Huh? I got my first sponsor, little guy like this, Jimmy F. He looked like Popeye the Sailor Man. Huh? I was sober 104 days. Sober a little bit too long. Was going to meetings. Huh? I was praying the birds off the trees. But there was no inventory yet. There was no reading the big book. There was none of that stuff. And it became so painful that I picked up a drink. And in those days, Jimmy used to come knock on the door. Hello? It's me. Open the door. Yeah. What are you doing? Oh, nothing. Yes, you are. Come on. We're going to the meeting. Oh, I've been drinking. I don't care about that. Let's go. He used to take me to a meetings drunk. You ever seen somebody bring an alcoholic to a meeting drunk, or an alcoholic walking in drunk? It's like when Moses opens the sea. Everybody thinks they're going to catch something. Relax, okay? This is Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson used to bring alcoholics in from the Bowery. Dr. Bob cared for 5,000 alcoholics in his lifetime. Unbelievable. You know, there was this guy, and you all heard of this guy, William James, eh? He was the guy that he was rated in the 2 centuries ago, in the 1800s. He was rated like he was the one. Psychologist he was, or psychiatrist he was. And he went to Clark Institute, I think 1908, something like that, some circle in that area. And in this weekend, it was a weekend, Sigmund Freud was there. He was presenting. William James was presenting. And Sigmund Freud had a little student with him called Carl Jung. Okay? These guys in the 1900s, Freud, Jung, and Adler, they were the most predominant psychiatrists in the world. Okay? And he met William James. Now, let's move forward. Circa 1933, 32, 33, Roland Hazard gets sent to him, to Zurich, to Switzerland, by his family, because he's a drunkard. They didn't call him alcoholics, they call him drunkards. And he gets sent to Carl Jung. Carl Jung has Roland Hazard in laboratory conditions. This is serious stuff. The family gave Carl Jung a blank check. You know what that was in depression, a blank check? Ho, ho, ho. He keeps him there for a year. After a year, he sets him free. He says, you can go home now. Roland goes to Paris, stops off at Paris to visit some friends, and they asked him the wrong question. You want a drink? And he took a drink. Boom. He go back to Carl Jung. He goes, and Carl Jung does something that changes the course of human history, actually. And really think about it. That's one of the reasons we're here. He says to him, I can't help you. You're what they call an alcoholic, and I've misdiagnosed your case. There's no help for you unless you find a spiritual experience, which good luck on finding that. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? Knocking on doors. Excuse me, you got a spiritual experience here? Oh, big trouble. So he comes back to the States. Okay, and he gets involved into the Oxford movement. Okay? There's a couple of people, him and this other guy named Shep, come and do the 6 steps they had then from the Oxford movement. They come and they do the 6-step call on Ebby, who they were mates. They knew each other. And so when they go to see Ebby just ran a car through a house. Okay? He got into some trouble, but he didn't want anything to do with them. So they left. Now, guess again, our lives hung on a thread. 2 weeks later, they come back, these guys. Now, this time, he was shooting the birds with a shotgun because they crapped on his new painted house that he just finished. Can you imagine? He just painted the house, and birds crapped on it. He got pissed off, and he started shooting them. You can't do that in Vermont. Now, he's looking at getting sentenced to the penitentiary. And so, Roland's family had a lot of money. And the judge released Ebby into Roland's care. Okay? And Roland took him back to New York. And he gets sober in the Oxford movement, and he meets Bill Wilson. And you guys know the rest of the story. Now, Bill Wilson gets the spiritual experience in Towns Hospital. Ebby goes to see him. Like the book says, they talk about some steps here and there, but he gets a spiritual experience, not as a result of the 12 steps, because there wasn't any yet. And everything changes for Bill Wilson. Everything changes for him. Now, when I got here, and little bit by little bit, my sponsors took me through the steps. Little bit by little bit, my perception started to change. You see, Alcoholics Anonymous does for me slowly what alcohol did for me quick. It slowly alters my perception of reality. It slowly alters it. I got married in Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a granddaughter, and when she was 2 weeks old, she died. My wife found it very, very difficult Very, very hard. Then move forward. When I think I was about 9 years sober. No, yeah, I was 9 years sober. My first wife died. You people carried me through that. My friend Jerry was there. He's on the call right now. Jerry, as a matter of fact, after the funeral, took me and put me into his car, his GMC he had, I think. Right, it was a GMC you had, right, Jer? And took me to the London conference. Now, at the London conference, I met Dr. Bob's son, Smitty. He was in Al-Anon. And Dr. Bob's son's wife had just died a week before he saw me. And he put something in my book, which I still have it. Still have this little book, a little big book I bought. He wrote something in it. God knows how you feel, and so do I. You see? The greatest love fest known to mankind here. I don't think the way that I used to think. I don't go and do criminal activities anymore. I don't drink. You see? There's some things here which are very interesting. You know, Bill talks about it in the 12 and 12. I hooked up when I was 5 years sober. My first sponsor died. My second sponsor was getting elderly up there. He was 95. And I was going through some things at 5 years of sobriety, and I called this guy named Clancy. And Clancy and I were together for 24 years before he passed away. But Clancy always used to talk to me about growing up. You see, 12 steps, 10, 11, and 12 is the grow up steps of growing up. Because here, very interesting, he says, on page 122 in the 12 and 12, he says, when AA was quite young, a number of eminent psychologists and doctors made an exhaustive study of a good-sized group of so-called problem drinkers. The doctors were trying to find out how different we were from one another. They sought to find whatever personality traits, if any, this group of alcoholics had in common. They finally came up with a conclusion that shocked the AA members of that time. These distinguished men had the nerve to say that most alcoholics under investigation were still childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. Does anybody know about those things? Hey, that's what Clancy was drilling into me for years. Grow up, kid. Maturity. That's what we're doing here. We're getting mature here. We're waking up to maturity here. Perceptions are changing. Right? That if we're the 12 step, in the 12 step, we're changing the perception. See? In the language of the heart, Bill writes, and I think Michael sort of talked about it. He writes this article called "The Greatest Gift of All," and he talks about the continuing awakening. Huh? He says we must awake or we'll die. But I believe this. I believe we have to continually awake around here. You see, this program for me is a program of uncover, discover, and discard. That's all I do here is uncover, discover, discard. I got married a second time. And in 2007, we went to a well, she was my wife was we took her into the emergency. She was having pain in her calf, and she just let it pain for a little while, and we took her into the hospital, and they gave her an appointment on, like, that was a Friday. On the Monday, to a neurologist. We went to the neurologist. Neurologist says, go downstairs to the hospital, get a CT scan on your lung. Went downstairs, came upstairs, and in a matter of an hour, she was diagnosed with 4-stage brain cancer. Now, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? I was like 40, I think maybe 46, 47 years old or something, not even. 15 years sober, I think I was. Well, I took care of her, nursed her. You know, Al-Anon used to come to the house, eh? They used to have meetings around her hospital bed, because their hospital bed, we had it on the main floor of the house. So Al-Anon would come and they have a meeting, and I would go to my AA meeting, because the rest of the time I was with her, nursing her. You know, spiritual awakenings here. I'll give you some of the type of awakenings that I had. It was very difficult for her to breathe. And in the mornings, I'd give her a shot of some medication for her leg. And it was just so difficult for her to breathe. And then we would do the 11-step prayer together. Okay? Well, I'm just going to close the door. We would do the 11-step prayer together. And then she'd start being able to breathe. It was amazing. Every morning after the 11-step prayer, she'd be able to start breathing. Eventually, we had to take her to the hospice. Okay? And the family was all around. And I knew what the death rattle was, because I experienced it with my stepfather, because I was with him when he passed. And I could just tell she was going to take her last breath. I said, darling, the angels are here. God loves you, and I love you. And she took her last breath. Now, you know how it says in our literature on page 55, the fundamental idea of God is in every man, woman, and child. This is what happened there. When she closed her eyes and she took her last breath, on energy. I didn't tell anybody in the family. They would have thought I was off my rocker. But I felt an energy in that room. And I've come to believe that energy was coming out of her. Sandy Beach used to talk about that. Let's talk about the energy. You know, I believe that what we're doing here is, like the book says, we've gotten this fourth dimension. We've entered this fourth dimension, and we're bringing the fourth dimension experience into the third dimension reality. Because the third dimension is life. It's just what happens around us in everyday living. And it's to bring that experience into the third dimension reality, and to wake and to stay awake. You see, a lot of people fall asleep around here. You know, a lot of people fall asleep around here. The idea for me is to stay awake with all the problems that I can have and everything, you know, or sometimes difficulties at home at times. Sometimes, you know, my wife's an Al-Anon, you know, family stuff, difficulties happen. But there's some principles here that you people have instilled in me through the steps. You know, I've, instead of being dishonest, I practice honesty today. Instead of being closed-minded, I practice open-mindedness today. Instead of being unwilling, I practice willingness today. Instead of being full of fear, I have courage today. Instead of having guilt and shame, I have integrity and dignity today. Instead of being impatient and intolerant, I have some tolerance and patience. You know how you get patience and tolerance around here? By being impatient and intolerant. That's just a spiritual law. That's how you get it. Practice some humility here. And I don't believe that I'm a humble person. I don't believe that's what this is about. This is practicing. This is about, humility is the ability to stay teachable. Humility is the ability to come from going from me to you. That's humility. Instead of practicing pride and ego, practicing some brotherly love instead of brotherly hatred, and practicing some forgiveness instead of being unforgiving, some self-restraint. You know how it says self-restraint, and Bill writes it in the 10 steps, self-restraint, an honest analysis of what is involved, a willingness to admit when the fault is ours, and an equal willingness to forgive when the fault is elsewhere. 10 step principle, self-restraint, and spiritual awareness, the 11th step. And then Dr. Bob said we could put our 12 steps together with 2 words, love and service. Wow. There is a guy that was rated in the 1900s, the greatest theologian of the 1900s. And he was in the United States, and he booked himself into the Trappist monastery in Gethsemane, Kentucky. And he was there from 13 to 18 years in silent meditation of God's will. That's a long time to be quiet. That's a long time to be quiet. And when he got out of there, he wrote this, because they asked him if he knew what God's will was. This is what he wrote. This guy's name was Thomas Merton, if you ever want to look him up. It says, "Dear God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think that I'm following your will does not actually mean that I'm doing so. But I believe this. I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. I hope I have that desire in everything I do, and I hope I never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it at the time. Therefore, I will trust you always, for though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death, I will not be afraid, because I know you will never leave me to face my troubles alone." So if a guy like that doesn't know what God's will is, I don't think I'm going to find out by next Tuesday. But the closest I want to be to God, right? The closest is to be able to practice those principles. I think that's a part of God consciousness, practicing those principles and being aware consciously about what's going on, about what's in other people as well. I have a spiritual advisor. Some of you may know her. She's a lovely lady named Mildred. And she talks about God being in everybody. It doesn't matter how bad the person may be, people in jail, people and doing horrific things. There's a God in everybody. I've come to understand the only thing that blocks me off from God is the human ego. I'm either better than you, dumber than you, slicker than you. But if I'm not like you, and I separate myself from you, called conscious ego separation, then I'm not a part of God, because for that moment, it's taken me out. It's separated me. You see that separation? This is about conscious unity, conscious awareness. There's there is in the book, in our big book, it tells us to outline the program of action and explain how you made self-appraisal. This is when when we're working with others, working with new people, how you straightened out your life and how you straightened out your past, and why you now endeavor to be helpful to him or to her. An alcoholic of my description, whose problem isn't alcohol, who's living with depression, anxiety, all the symptoms of the disease of alcoholism. Somebody comes up and gives me a solution. If I'm really, really serious, that's what I was. I was scared. I didn't want to die eventually. Eventually, I didn't want to die. After I drank after 104 days, I didn't want to die. And little bit by little bit, like I said, I started to do what you guys did. It's a very, very powerful thing, this Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the greatest love fest known to mankind, I've come to believe. So I've gotten married again to a teenage sweetheart. How life works, eh? When we were together, and when I was 18, she was 17, and life brought us back together again. Wow. Only in AA. I'll tell you some of the awakenings that I got this was a big one for me. And it's really it really has to do with the first step, but I awakened to it in the 12th at a deeper level. That if my problem is alcohol, I cannot be an alcoholic. Conversely, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not and cannot be alcohol. It's something that sounds like an alcohol problem, but our brain deludes what it really is. It's something called alcoholism. And the difference between an alcohol problem and the disease of alcoholism is quite simple. If you got an alcohol problem, all you got to do is stop drinking. With the disease of alcoholism, when we stop drinking, our life becomes so unbearable we can't live in it. That was a lifesaver for me, but that was an awakening which I carry with me today, still at 33 years. I still carry that with me, because that's the nature of my illness, is that I can get restless, irritable, and discontent without alcohol. So I have to be awake. I have to treat my spiritual condition, right? I read inspirational books. I read AA literature. I have a spiritual class I go to once a week. I go to meetings. I have a great home group. I left it for a little. I just left it for a couple of months. I joined another home group and I went back. Right? Group is important. You know what group stands for, eh? The abbreviation for group, grow up. That's what we're going to learn, how to grow up in our group. Huh? I learned that from an old timer years ago. The third step was said here today very beautifully. It was very, very nicely done. But we're asking God to relieve us from the bondage of self. And then we're going into the seventh step and asking the Creator to remove from us every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. But then he goes into the 11th step. Now here, he's asking us, huh? We're asking God for self to die, huh? To die of self. And in the end of it, we're dying of self, daily dying of self. You know, the first meeting that Bill Wilson and Father Ed Dowling had, you know, Father Ed Dowling was his spiritual advisor. In the first meeting they had, the janitor came up and knocked on Wilson's door and says, "There's somebody who's here to see you." And so Bill thought it was an alcoholic. He said, Bill was in depression. Things weren't going to come on up. And this big man came up, and as he took his coat off, he had a brim hat on, he took his coat off. Bill saw the white collar. And he introduced himself. And he wanted to know about the 12 steps because he was a Jesuit priest, Father Ed Dowling. And they were practicing the Ignatian exercises, spiritual exercises. So he wanted to know about the 12 steps. So Bill's talking to him, and little bit by little bit, they start talking, and Bill does a 5th step with him. But Bill asks him this question. He says, "Father, when am I going to get some spiritual satisfaction?" And Father Ed Dowling said this to Bill Wilson: "Never." And think about it. We never get spiritual satisfaction here if we're seeking. We're growing all the time. It says it in Bill Sees It, we're growing. Right? As we grow, it becomes painful to grow. So we awaken. At least I do. I awaken to the pain. Awaken to growing. You know, Bill had this, uses this term in the 10th step. Pain is the touchstone of all spiritual progress. He got that from Father Ed. But that's where we're doing. Because Bill Wilson, I don't know if you know this, Bill Wilson never worked the 12 steps till 1946. He stayed on his spiritual experience. And then he wanted to write this thing called the 12 and 12, which Father Ed helped him write. But he said, in order for me to help you with the 12 and 12, you got to do the steps. So he did the steps, and then they did the 12 and 12. So, I mean, the work that I do here with you people, you know, I got to have the 3 P's all the time: people, program, and prayer. Always. I always have to have those things. You know, I always have to come to meetings. To keep the awakening going, I got to always do my meditation and my prayers. And work with other people. Work with other alcoholics. And not just, you know, in the community too. You know, I was in the addictions field off and on for over 20 years. Maybe even 22 now. But I've been in the healthcare field now for over 25. And I got out of the addiction field, and I'm a community health worker now. That's a long way from being in lockdown, in solitary confinement, to doing that. And I have the privilege of caring for people and helping them transition over from this life to the next life. Huh? It's very beautiful, beautiful work. And, you know, and connecting with people's spirits. In the outside world, not just people in AA, but connecting with people's spirits out there. Because they're God's kids too. Huh? I've learned that. I've learned that we're all God's kids. If you are, I am. If I am, you are. If you ain't, I ain't. We're in a lot of trouble. But we're all God's kids. That's an awakening that I have received. You know, I've received awakenings that, not everybody is happy in this world, but that's okay. I got to love them anyway. Right? And it's hard to do that sometimes. It's when you're watching somebody slowly kill themselves, huh? It's sometimes hard not to say anything or hard not to interfere. But I remember one time a long time ago, when I said to one of my sponsors, I says, my grandmother was negative to me when I was growing up. And he said to me, what were you like with people when you were drinking? Right? Took care of that one right away. Right? Always put it back on me. Always put it back on me. If there be fault, let it be mine. That was sort of talked about today a lot, actually. If there be fault, let it be mine. Just didn't use those words. But it's a very important thing, because that way I can continue to look at my faults, my mistakes. I'm of the same as one of the other speakers says, there's no my part. Because if I got a part, then somebody else has got a part. It's very dangerous. Our literature doesn't say that. I said Marty was talking about that, actually. So my part. Where have I been? Where are my faults, my mistakes? You see, this is the continuing awakening. This is where I continually awaken in my defects as well. Wake up, what does it say in our book? It says we have 100 forms of fear, 100 forms of self-delusion, 100 forms of self-seeking, 100 forms of self-pity. That's 400 forms. Good luck doing that in a 4-step. That's why you got a 10-step. To wake up to these things. Wake up. Keep waking up and waking up. Uncover, discover, discard. Uncover, discover, discard. It's the whole program. I have a peace today that surpasseth all understanding. I don't understand this peace. Because when I was drinking, I had the peace when I was drinking. It's when I was sober the next day I didn't have the peace. I had the restlessness, irritability, discontentedness. When I drank, I had all kinds of peace. And now, without alcohol, and the God of my understanding, and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm gifted peace, the greatest gift of all. I want to read something to you guys. This is a very touching little part here in the last part of this, the next frontier. Not the next frontier, the greatest gift of all. So this is about a millionaire. Okay, so he says, the other day, an old timer AA gave me an example which I'll never forget. Jack is a real old timer. In fact, he started AA in my town. I used to envy him because he was a millionaire. They told me he was in our local hospital, deathly sick and about to die. In a way, I hated to go there. I would be so sad. When I walked into the room, it was filled with AAs, all in a happy mood. They were happy because Jack was happy. He was telling funny drinking stories, now and then wiping away the blood that ran down his chin from the cancerous mouth. He sat upright, his legs and bare feet hanging from the edge of the bed. A nurse came in remonstrating, begging him to lie down. Waving her away, he said, if I lie down flat on this bed, I might die now. And that would be too bad because I want to go to our AA state convention next week. What dedication, eh? Awakening, eh? He saw that this was no bravado. We saw that this was no bravado. He really meant it. A little later, Jack spoke again of death. He said that he had a wonderful life. Whiskey had brought him great pain, but as a result, AA had given him great joy. With his awakening in AA had come the utter conviction, indeed, the sure knowledge that in my house there are many mansions. Everybody there could see that to Jack, death was but a fresh awakening. He never did get to the AA convention, but Jack knew, and we knew, that this didn't really matter, for Jack was in full possession of the greatest gift of all, the awakening. Wow. I'm going to close with this. I do this prayer every day. I do a 3rd step prayer. I do 7-step prayer, 11-step prayer. I ask God, please help me. I say, God, please help me die more of self today than yesterday. I throw that in there, right? I throw the principles that I just talked about. Ask God to help me detach from people too. And I ask God to forgive me for people who have harmed me today. Help me show them the same love and kindness and tolerance I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I do that set-aside prayer. I learned that here on Zoom. I love it. And I do this, and I've done this for many years. It goes like this. And this is what I think about all of you and what I feel about you. It goes like this. Thank God for you, good friend of mine. Seldom is a friendship such as thine. How very much I wish to be as helpful as you have been to me. Of many prayer guests, one thou art, on whom I ask God to impart rich blessings from his storehouse rare, and grant to you his gracious care. As I recall from time to time how you have inspired this heart of mine, I find myself inclined to pray, God bless my friend this very day. So often at the throne of grace, there comes the picture of your face. And then instinctively I pray that God may guide you all the way. Someday I hope with you to stand before the throne of God's right hand and say to you at journey's end, praise God, you've been to me a friend. Thank God for you. Thank you, Lovey. Thank you, committee, for the privilege of coming here to talk tonight. Thank you.
You guys recovered alcohol.